Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Hope the week has gone well. We continue to see very wet weather from this Indian Ocean dipole system that's hit Eastern Africa and gone all the way to Kinshasa, apparently. Let me start with home thoughts. This is Meru National Park, which is home to a mosaic of different habitats and varied landscapes with 13 permanent rivers running through the park. It really is an exquisite, quite remote place to visit, and I would recommend it. And of course, you will recall the famous story of George and Joy Adamson as well. They were pretty close in that very remote region. This is a photograph of Kenyan waters in Kilifi taken by Wanzala, which I thought was very evocative and made me want to go to the sea. I then came across a tremendous article via Brain Picker, Through the First Antarctic Night, a pioneering polar explorer, on the resilience of the human spirit, a narrative tale of the voyage of the Belgica among newly discovered lands and over an unknown sea about the South Pole. Cook joined the Belgian Antarctic expedition of 1897 as official surgeon and anthropologist. When the ship was trapped in pack ice just before the descent of the endless polar night, he toiled with the other men to free it, a Sisyphean ambition for these tiny human ants against the frozen colossus. The Belgian expedition became the first to winter in the Antarctic, a feat previously thought unsurvivable. He chronicles the eternal tug-of-war between our capacity for despair and our capacity for transcendence, between absolute desolation and almost unbearable beauty. As the crew surrender their survival and their sanity to the unfeeling icy grip of nature, in one spot we soared 8 hours and cut less than 5 feet. Now the sun is low on the horizon, the darkness which is soon to throw the icy splendors into a hopeless sooty gloom is gathering its hellish fabric to cover the laughing glory of day. The sunless winter of storm, of unimaginable cold, of heart-destroying depression is rapidly advancing. Helpless in a hopeless sea of ice, he writes, we are now doomed to remain and become the football of an unpromising fate. Henceforth we're to be kicked, pushed, squeezed, and ushered helplessly at the mercy of the pack. Our first duty is to prepare for the coming of the night, and with its unknowable cold and its soul-depressing effects. Outside there's been a rapid transformation. The summer days of midnight suns are past, and the premonitory darkness of the long night is falling upon us with marvelous rapidity. For in this latitude the sun dips below the southern skies at midnight late in January. This dip increases and sweeps more and more of the horizon every day until early in May, when the sun sets and remains below the horizon for 71 days. It is midnight in midwinter. 35 long dayless nights have passed. An equal number of dreary, cheerless days must elapse before we again see the glowing orb, the star of day. The sun has reached its greatest northern declination. We have thus passed the Antarctic midnight. The winter solstice is to us the meridian day, the zenith of the night, as much as 12 o'clock is the meridian hour to those who dwell in the more favoured lands, in the temperate and tropical zones, where there is a regular day and night 365 times in the yearly cycle. Yesterday was the darkest day of the night. A more dismal sky and a more depressing scene could not be imagined. But today the outlook is a little brighter. The sky is lined with a few touches of orange. The frozen sea of black snow is made more cheerful by the highlights, with a sort of dull phosphorescent glimmer of the projecting peaks of ice. The temperature has suddenly fallen to minus 27.5 degrees centigrade at noon, and the wind is coming out of the south with an easy force, which has sent all the floating humidity of the past few days down, leaving an air clear and sharp. After so much physical, mental and moral depression, and after having our anticipations raised to a fever heat by the tempting increase of dawn at noon, it is needless to say that we are elated at the expectation of actual daylight once more. In these dreadful wastes of perennial ice and snow, man feels the force of the superstitions of past ages and becomes willingly a worshipper of the eternal luminary. I am certain that if our preparations for greeting the returning sun were seen by other people, either civilized or savage, we would be thought disciples of heliotree. At 11 o'clock, every single man aboard the ship stakes out a position from which he is to greet the long-awaited light. Some climb to the top of the masts, others perch on the ropes and spars, and the most adventurous set up hammocks on the surrounding icebergs. Cook describes the otherworldly spectacle of returning colour, saturated by their months-long anticipation. The northern sky at this time was nearly clear and clothed with the usual haze. A bright lemon glow was just changing into an eve glimmer of rose. At about 11:30, a few stratus clouds spread over the rose, and under there was as plain colours, too complex for my powers of description. The clouds were at first violet, and they quickly caught the train of colours which was spread over the sky beyond. There were spaces of gold, orange, blue, green, and 100 harmonious blends, with an occasional strip like a band of polished silver to set the colours in bold relief. Precisely at 12 o'clock, a fiery cloud separated, disclosing a bit of the upper rim of the sun. I just couldn't imagine I would not make it through that. A gauzy atmosphere in which the colour appeared to rest. For several minutes my companions did not speak. Indeed, we could not at that time have found words with which to express the buoyant feeling of relief and the emotion of the new life which was sent coursing through our arteries by the hammer-like beats of our enfeebled hearts. From there I jumped to another article I'd read a while back called The White Darkness, a solitary journey through Antarctica. The man felt like a speck in the frozen nothingness. Every direction he turned, he could see ice stretching to the edge of the earth. White ice and blue ice, glacial ice tongues and ice wedges. There were no living creatures in sight, not a bear or even a bird, nothing but him. It was hard to breathe, and each time he exhaled, the moisture froze on his face. A chandelier of crystals hung from his beard. His eyebrows were encased like preserved specimens. His eyelashes cracked when he blinked. Get wet and you die, he often reminded himself. 62 days early, on November 13th, he'd set out from the coast of Antarctica, hoping to achieve what his hero Ernest Shackleton had failed to do a century earlier, to trek on foot from one side of the continent to the other. In February 1902, the group set up a base camp on the frozen rim of Antarctica. The continent has two seasons, summer, which lasts from November to February, and winter, For much of the summer, because of the tilt of the earth, sunlight lingers through the night. In winter, the darkness is enveloping, and the conditions are even more anathema to human life. The temperature 1 July was recorded at minus 128 degrees. And so Scott waited until November 2nd, when the summer light began to grace the sky, before he embarked with Shackleton and a third man, Edward Wilson, on the 800-mile journey to the pole, what another member of the expedition called the long trail, the lone trail, the outward trail, the darkward trail. This is Shackleton's grave on South Georgia Island. The explorer died there of heart failure in 1922 while attempting to circumnavigate the Antarctic continent. Scientists discover stardust in Antarctic snow. And then, if you haven't seen Werner Herzog, Encounters at the End of the World, where he travels to Antarctica, that link is also on the website, and it's pretty remarkable as well. Go from that landscape back to Meru. We arrived mid-afternoon at Meru National Park. During the September dry season, we wandered the tracks and late in the day noticed a large group of African elephants with babies on the move. That's a beautiful photograph. This is a photograph of the early morning at Meru National Park. And this is a photograph of 2 rhinos that I took when I visited. There are plenty of rhinos there. If you forget me, Pablo Neruda, I want you to know one thing. You know how this is if I look at the crystal moon, at the red branch of the slow autumn at my window, if I touch near the fire the impalpable ash or the wrinkled body of the log, everything carries me to you as if everything that exists, aromas, light, metals, were little boats that sail toward those isle of yours that wait for me. Well now, if little by little you stop loving me, I shall stop loving you little by little. If suddenly you forget me, do not look for me, for I shall already have forgotten you. If you think it long and mad, the wind of banners that passes through my life, and you decide to leave me at the shore of the heart where I have roots, remember on that day, at that hour, I shall lift my arms and my roots will set off to seek another land. But if each day, each hour, you feel that you are destined for me with implacable sweetness, if each day a flower climbs up to your lips to seek me, ah, my love, ah, my own, in me all that fire is repeated. In me nothing is extinguished or forgotten. My love feeds on your love, beloved, and as long as you live it, will be in your arms without leaving mine. We had finally found the magic land at the end of the road, and we never dreamed the extent of the magic. Jack Kerouac. The great blazing stars came out, the far receding hills got dim. I felt like an arrow that could shoot out all the way. And one of my favorite photographs by Robert Frank, which Kerouac describes this photograph as a long shot of night road arrowing forlorn into immensities and flat of impossible to believe America and New Mexico under the prisoner's moon. Political reflections. China is considering to put the drafters of the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act on the no-entry list, barring them from entering Chinese mainland Hong Kong and Macau. Based, what I know, out of respect for Mr. Trump, the US and its people, China is considering to put the drafters of the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act on the no-entry list. And I sort of tweeted after that, why is Wall Street down and on Thanksgiving after China signalled such a ratcheting down? And I think the signal has been interfered with in the noise, but this to me was a significant development. The most important currency to watch is the Renminbi. It is a shock absorber and a very precise first responder to Trump. So let's take a look at that. That's below 703. So that's to me signaling that my interpretation of whose tweet is correct. This is the night after the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act has passed. Hong Kong people gathered and celebrated. That's from Nathan Law, and what a sight that is. The Tories will win a majority of 68 seats in the December 12 election, according to a YouGov poll which used a technique that more closely predicted the 2017 election than standard surveys. The poll put the Conservatives on course to win 359 of the 650 seats in Parliament, a gain of 42 on the last election. Through a process called multi-level regression and post-stratification, or MRP for short, YouGov aims to identify different types of voters and predict their behaviour. The poll was bleak for Corbyn, showing Labour on course for its worst election result since 1983. It had the party winning no new seats and watching the crumbling of its so-called red wall of districts in the north of England that have voted Labour for decades. So it's looking increasingly like Boris is going to have a big victory. As I said, on the 18th of November, the pound has risen from multi-year lows like a phoenix and has room to rally further, especially if Bojo builds a big lead, which he is doing. Everything pivots on whether there is a clean and clear outcome, I said. Iraq, curfew imposed in Nasiriyah in the south of the country. That's first squawk. As I said over the last weekend, if a civil war is ignited in the Shia Crescent and the nature of the hybrid warfare indicates this is the direction of travel, the implosion will engender catastrophic consequences. Reuters, we will cut the hand of anyone trying to get near al-Sistani. This is now in Najaf. This is a short video from Amnesty about what's going on there, and it's not looking good at all. Are we on the path to war? Middle East heats up while viewers watch the impeachment. The basic lineup for what is going on in the Persian Gulf region runs something like this. Israel, the Saudis, most of the Gulf states are keen on attacking Iran, which on its side has lined up as friends and allies Iraq, Syria and Lebanon, all three of which are under huge pressure. The US intention is to starve the Iranian people into rebelling against their government, but the unrest is also reportedly being fueled by Saudi-paid agents provocateurs, as well as a flood of media and social network propaganda that is as well being supported and organized by Riyadh. One recent incident that has attracted remarkably little media coverage is an Israeli attack on Syria that took place on November the 19th. Reportedly destroyed 2 Iranian Revolutionary Guard headquarters. Overwhelming and disproportionate response by Israel suggests that Tel Aviv would like to have produced a commensurate response from the Iranians. There have been a number of key meetings in the region that suggest that something big is coming. In an odd move, the US and France have agreed to take steps to increase security in the Gulf region by enhancing defensive systems in the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia. Recent visitors have included CIA Director Gina Haspel meeting with the Saudi King Salman in November to discuss topics of interest, Mike Pompeo visiting the UAE to talk about Iran and other regional issues, and Vice President Mike Pence staging a surprise visit to the Kurds in Syria. As I said, what is clear is that Team Pompeo is seeking to accelerate the Iranian situation towards a denouement. And I was looking at the tweet thread where Mark Owen Jones did some excellent work, And I was saying that, MEK, PMOI, cult-like leader Mariam Rajavi, who tweeted the whole issue is that the Veliat-e-Faqih regime is on its last leg. And I said, this alliance of Pompeo, MAGA tweet army, Mariam Rajavi and the MEK is just not credible. It's incredible. And then I was concluding by saying, if a civil war is ignited in the Shia Crescent and the nature of the hybrid warfare indicates this is the direction of travel, the implosion will engender catastrophic consequences which will be impossible to manage and will surely imperil Arab NATO itself. And I concluded by saying oil is the purest proxy and is at an 8-week high. This is, my comment about Pompeo having some curious bedfellows. Cue the MEK response. Strike team from Albania tweeted PRDT_. From dictatorship to democracy, a conceptual framework for liberation written in 1993 by Gene Sharp is, a viral pamphlet spread like a virus, and talks about the wildfire spread of systematically non-violent insurgency, which is dovetails into the article I was writing about the avocado millennial Gladwellian economy that we now exist in. Macron press conference yesterday, Russia is part of Europe, our enemy is the terrorist groups in the Sahel and the Levant. This tweet was from Bruno Makaish. I'll just say that the Russians are deploying a lot of propaganda to undercut the French presence in Africa. He wants a NATO that works with Russia and China and fights against political militant Islam. In the press conference, Macron is not interested in Trump or in Europe's strategic autonomy. He just thinks that NATO has misidentified its enemy. He wants a NATO that works with Russia and China and fights against political militant Islam. Finally, this was explicitly argued. There is a moment when he notes with a kind of humour that I instinctively relate to, it is kind of important to define your enemy. I think his antennae are totally scrambled. I find Macron's recent geopolitical musings a complete non sequitur. And to wit, Peter Pomerantsev thread on basic fundamentals that are unsexy and non-attention hacking and thus true. When we discuss Russia these days, we should not forget that it has attacked a peaceful neighbour without any legitimate reason, has annexed a part of its territory and occupies another. More than 13,000 have been killed in this war of aggression. This is Ulrich Speck. And there's a great thread. Western unity has helped the victim of the aggression in Ukraine to stop Russian-led troops. Europe and the US agreed to use largely non-military means, mainly sanctions, to communicate its disagreement to Putin and make him pay a price. Russian aggression against Ukraine, its aggressive rhetoric, also led to a different assessment of the country's intentions. It became more widely seen a threat to NATO countries as well. That's why NATO decided to focus on defense and deterrence against Russia, with two goals in mind: to prevent Russia from following the instincts of some of its leaders to turn against NATO deterrence, and to reassure the countries in the region that the security order vital to them is solid, to prevent them from seeking alternative arrangements. NATO achieved both goals under US leadership, with an engaged Germany and an engaged UK, and with support from France. The brain and body of NATO both demonstrated that they are fully up to the task. NATO continued to play the role it ever played since 70 years. With the help of the US, the organization provides a security framework that ends intra-European competition over leadership or hegemony, gives every country a deep sense of security, and deters other great powers. With the US largely in charge for defense and strategy, Europe was finally free to focus on cooperation, on economic and social issues, on building a joint European space of prosperity and liberty. Enter Trump with his disruptive rhetoric. Under him, the US abandons strategic leadership in Europe, but keeps its military engagement strong, yet the push for more burden sharing becomes stronger. The new insecurity and the empty throne of strategic leadership in Europe brings hyper-ambitious yet inexperienced Macron to make his bid. He comes up with a very traditional French geopolitical vision, a French-led Europe in partnership with the US and Russia, focusing on the south. Yet this is a vision that conflicts with the most of Europe. There is no majority in Europe in favour of cutting down the US-NATO relationship, of letting the guard down towards Russia, and focusing on France's version of the war on terror in Africa. Macron fails to understand that leading is not the same as going forward with your own agenda, dismisses other views and interests as irrelevant or wrong. International leadership must be inclusive, integrate different interests and viewpoints in a broader strategy. The problem is that learning by doing is dangerous in the current fragile geopolitical situation. Too much porcelain gets broken. NATO is as fragile as European unity. Russia and China actively try to build influence in a fragmented Europe. America struggles with this role. I think that's exactly the point. 5th of December 2016, I wrote The Parabolic Rebound of Vladimir Putin. And I wrote then, at this moment, Putin is fortress Europe surrounded, and his Trojan horse, we've now learned, is Emmanuel Macron. And I called him a geopolitical grandmaster in October 2015. Rajeh, Gotabaya and Narendra Modi are meeting today, and a meeting of two mates and minds. Djibouti, Niger, Republic of Congo, Kyrgyzstan, Laos, Cambodia, Maldives have in common they all owe China debts more than 25% of GDP. That's via Adam Toombs. Let's go to the currency markets. Euro dollar 110.09, dollar index 98.319, Japanese yen 109.54, Swiss franc 0.9987, the pound 129.04. The Australian dollar is at 0.6777, India rupee 71.8488. They're due to report GDP numbers, which are expected to be weak. South Korean won 11.8014. The Brazilian real has recovered from record lows, well, just a little, 4.1894. Egyptian pound 16.1219, and the South African rand 14.6734. Dollar index 98.319, but strengthening a lot against emerging market currencies. Watch for a potential double bottom on the euro dollar, says T commodity, and then he's talking about it being a funding currency and in a risk-off environment getting a bid. Commodity markets, gold 1457.50. Oil set for a fourth weekly advance ahead of key OPEC plus meeting. We're currently around $58. I expect us to head towards $62 because it's the purest proxy, and I see it as not a demand issue. I see it as a supply side issue with a lot of risk in key places, particularly Iraq, for example. Lebanon urged to restructure debt as crisis deepens. Lebanon has vowed to repay $1.5 billion to holders of its government debt as planned this week. They paid that. Total borrowing is $88.4 billion, as one of the world's biggest debt burdens, projected to be 155% of GDP by the end of 2019. They can reschedule this debt with cheaper Eurobond issuance, not actually paying it, but rescheduling it. Estimates that over 2/3 of the $1.5 billion owed would remain in the country, as the debt is already held by local lenders in the central bank. The balance to foreign investors can be covered from existing foreign exchange reserves. Economists are increasingly concerned that such strategies will no longer be sufficient. In October, amid the worsening economic climate, the central bank introduced a facility to guarantee access to dollars for critical imports, accelerating the depletion of the state's FX reserves, which fell by $900 million alone in the first week of November. At that rate, FX reserves would run out by the middle of 2020. Central bank says its gross international reserves are around $30 billion, but analysts say it would be hard immediately to access that full amount. Moody's puts the central bank's usable foreign exchange buffer at $5 to $10 billion. The BDL is now lending to the government and commercial banks, so it has to make decisions about how it uses its remaining reserves. Current dollar shortages caused the unofficial exchange rate to fall by 20% since August. As I wrote in that New Economy of Anger article, prolonged standoffs eviscerate economies, reducing opportunities, and accelerate the negative feedback loop. JP Morgan 5-year credit default spreads have almost doubled since the start of unrest to 2,161 basis points. 10-year Eurobond prices have fallen to less than half their face value. Access to external funding has become more constrained. Parallel exchange rate has emerged, with the pound trading at more than 30% above the official 1,507 against the dollar. Bloomberg, pound has weakened almost 30% on the black market since the start of August, trades at 2,100 per dollar on the streets of Beirut as businesses struggle to buy foreign exchange at the official rate. Yields on $1.2 billion of bonds maturing next March climbed to over 100% this month from around 13% before the unrest began. Yield closed at 100.47% on Thursday. Government debt maturing beyond 2021 mostly trades below 50 cents on the dollar. I take you back to that link for Rony Seikaly, Revolution Radio Mix. Antonio Gramsci, the crisis consists precisely in the fact that the old is dying and the new cannot be born. In this interregnum, a great variety of morbid symptoms appear. Now is the time of monsters. Latin American currencies are hitting record lows as drop turns to rout. Have a look at this chart from Bloomberg. EM exports growth now falling almost as much as they did in the Great Recession. Even at a time when the currencies are all breaking down, it all points back to China's stumbling growth, says Tavi Costa. I call this the feedback loop phenomenon. I said China has exerted the power of pull over a vast swathe of the world over the last 2 decades. We can call it the China, Asia, EM and frontier markets feedback loop. And I was saying it had been positive for 2 decades and now is in reverse. Brazil's peso problem, Robin Brooks on the Brazilian real. Why was 2019 so bad? It's just impossible for the real to strengthen when the Argentine peso is struggling, or is it something else? Sub-Saharan Africa, Indian Ocean dipole, look at this. Djibouti, 250,000 people affected by Djibouti flash floods. Burundi accuses Rwanda of armed attack, threatens retaliation. Accused Rwanda of sending troops earlier this month to attack one of its military positions and pledged to use legitimate defense if its northern neighbor continues the hostility. 8 Burundian soldiers were killed when gunmen attacked their camp close to the Rwandan border on November 16. Invaders retreated back into Uganda after the attack, Burundi said. Burundi avails itself of this opportunity to warn Rwanda against these repetitive and multifaceted attacks against Burundi and wants the international community to take note. In case of recidivism, the government of the Republic of Burundi reserves the right of legitimate defense. The Rwandan army spokesman, Innocent Mnangagwa, dismissed the allegation and asked Burundi for evidence. If we were to do it, it would be in broad daylight, he said, by telephone. Press release, Eritrea Ministry of Information has issued several statements in the past that elucidated Qatar's deplorable schemes of subversion using the Sudan as a springboard in this particular year, which the prospects of using the Sudan as a suitable venue for launching terrorist activities has become increasingly slimmer. Desperation of Qatar, its sponsors and minions has accordingly become higher, saying they want to instill religious extremism, sow the seeds of ethnic cleavage, launch efforts to induce protests and demonstrations, assassinate influential Eritrean leaders, conduct acts of economic sabotage in Eritrea. Ministry of Information. The attached report just released by the UN Special Rapporteur On the right to food is an utterly damning indictment on the Zimbabwe government. That's a tweet from David Coulthard, but read the release. It speaks to what we know now: preferential allocation of food and millions starving because of the chronically bad policies of ZANU-PF. As I wrote on the 9th of September, this was an economy which was the breadbasket of the region. President Mnangagwa orders the maize subsidy to be restored, claims Mutuli Cube never consulted, though Mutuli Cube read out the budget where he made that announcement in front of the president. FX volatility: Nigeria Naira, Egyptian Pound, Ghana Cedi, Kenya Shilling, South African Rand and Zambia Kwacha compared. This is from Paul Wallace. As I wrote on the 14th of October, the canary in the coal mine is Zambia. The Kwacha has fallen more than 18% against the dollar this year after a drop in the production and price of copper, which the nation relies on for about 70% of export earnings. South African all shares up 5.62% year to date, dollar rand 14.67, Egyptian pound 16.12, EGX 30 up 6.24% year to date, Nigerian all share down 14.65% year to date, Ghana Stock Exchange down 14.37% year to date. Jumia has shut its Tanzania e-commerce business in portfolio review. Known as the Amazon of Africa, said on Thursday to shut its e-commerce business in Tanzania in a review of its portfolio. Have a look at the share price chart, which I got from TradingView. It is totally a busted flush. According to the Business Daily here in Kenya, cash in circulation is at a 6-year low. John Githongo talking about the BBI document. It's a muddled, incoherent document full of tribal sinecures. It's a rather cynical, vacuous document offered up by an elite that has raided national coffers to the point of fiscal distress, yet the document makes no acknowledgement of that. Treasury bills heavily underperform. That's from Meru. Performance rates: 91-day, just 23.42% of bids received of amount offered. 182-day, just 10.56% market-weighted average interest rate, 0.653% higher. So pretty poor performance there. He's also tweeted top 5 largest import sources as a percentage of total of major origins of imports: China 31%, India 15%, Saudi 14%, UAE 12%, Japan 8%, and then major destinations of exports: USA 14%, Netherlands 13%, UK 12%, UAE 7%, Germany 3%, France 2%. I&M Holdings reported Q3 2019 earnings. EPS was up 14.072%. Interesting line item: loans and advances to banks went up 52.41%. Kenya Power is delaying the release of its full year earnings. The share price data link is there. The Nairobi all shares up 11.49%. NSE 20 is down 7.73%. And on the point of the Indian Ocean dipole, Narok town is now a massive river. That's from Ole Tiwain. I wish you a great weekend.